Portage County Board of Supervisors meeting, recorded May 21, 2019.
We'll call the Portage County Board to order. First thing, roll call. If here, press yes and confirm.
There, that's done.
23 present, 2 excused.
Pledge allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Invocation by Supervisor Larry Rakowski.
Let us pray. In less than a week, many Americans will be celebrating Memorial Day. For some, it's a day off from work, a graduation party, or just time to spend with family. But for others, it's a time to remember those who served and lost their life. There was a time when those who fought for us did so on foreign soils, but more and more often now we are losing people here closer to home. It's not just city cops or sheriff's deputies anymore. We are losing teachers and students that have made the sacrifice to stand up and protect others. This past week, a firefighter from Appleton lost his life. Lord, help us as elected officials to bring an end to violence and the continued rise of mental health issues. We as humans cannot continue to become numb to these things that seem to happen on a daily basis. Lord, our list is often long for what we ask for, but please also give our farmers some good planting weather so they may continue to feed us. We thank you, Lord. Amen.
Amen. Review and approval of April 16th, 2019 County Board meeting minutes. A motion by Supervisor O'Brien, seconded by Supervisor Gussel. Any corrections or changes? All those in favor with aye? Aye. Opposed? Minutes approved. Correspondence.
In your packet was the Wisconsin Counties Association Forward Analytics Report.
Members of the public who wish to address the county board on specific agenda items must register their requests at this time, with such comments subject to the reasonable control of the county board chair as set forth in Robert's Rules of Order. Anybody from the public? Thank you. Discussion possible action on recommending denial of claims submitted by Cincinnati Insurance Company and its insured Hanson Auction Group. I'll take a motion to deny. Motion by Zdroik, second by Supervisor Jankowski. Any discussion? Supervisor Medine.
We have a real short description of what this is.
Dave?
Yeah, there's a notice of claim document in your packet, I believe, and that gives you the facts. This was a motor vehicle accident. It's a property damage claim between a squad car and another vehicle that was insured by the Cincinnati Insurance Company. When parties have potential claims against municipalities, they serve these notice of circumstances and actual claim documents. It's a requirement under the statute. You have to serve it before you can file a lawsuit. Once the party submits the claim, then it's up to the governmental body, in this case the county board, to either grant or deny the claim. They're almost always denied. That is our recommendation here, both from my office and from our insurance company. That's just the next step in the process. If the claimant wants to move forward, they can. They'll do that by either to continue trying to negotiate with us on the claim and our insurance carrier, or by filing a lawsuit. But it's a property damage claim, motor vehicle accident.
Does that answer your question, Dave? Anybody else? We have a motion and a second. All those in favor, push yes, and oppose no.
You can do a voice vote on that.
Oh.
Who was it?
Take it down.
Do the motion by voice vote if you could for right now.
We can do by voice vote and.
We're going to switch gears and do a voice vote on this motion. All those in favor with denying, that's the motion and the second, state. Oh, now you're good to, okay.
Are we ready?
Supervisors Astro.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think this requires, I'm sorry, this should require a voice vote, and everybody be acknowledged as to how they voted, please.
It's up.
It's up now.
It's up now.
Working. Well, thank
It's working again, so we're going to go back to the first way. Again, the motion was to deny. All those in favor of denying, vote yes, and opposed, no.
Can you bring it up?
Good way.
22 ayes, 1 abstain, 2 excused. Motion to deny passed.
Presentations, the first one we have is Sarah Bursch, Stevens Point Area Convention and Visitor Bureau, Local Tourism Economy Update.
First of all, thank you all for letting me address you this evening. It's a pleasure. I typically do this about once every year, and I have relationships with many of you, have worked on many community events and community development projects, so it's always great to address you. And for those that aren't familiar with me, my name is Sarah Bursch, and I'm the Executive Director of the Stevens Point Area Convention and Visitors Bureau. And for those of you that haven't worked with me in the past, our role at the Convention and Visitor Bureau is to boost economic development through the tourism economy, which means bringing visitors to the community for the benefit of the local economy. And we do that a number of different ways. We, of course, market the region as a hotbed for tourism through meetings and conventions, sports events, and tourism-related initiatives, including leisure. Many of the leisure things that we promote in the area include our brand assets, which includes Century World, the Stevens Point Brewery, the University of Wisconsin Stevens Point, the arts and culture scene here, and a few others. But those are sort of our lead-ins when we're talking about the region. We know that those are some of the iconic things that people recognize the area for, and so we use those as sort of launching pads to talk about all the other great things that there are in the community. Again, we do that a variety of different ways, through traditional advertising, through print and online advertising, social media. We're on all the major social media platforms, including Facebook and Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, and I'm probably missing 10 more. But we also write a number of blogs to keep our visitors engaged. Some folks know us by our location, the Visitor Information Center on North Division. We also maintain that center and welcome over 20,000 visitors every year to that Visitor Information Center. Additionally, at your seats, I placed our visitor guide. That's our premier response piece for visitors that are requesting information, either when they're in market. We have them placed at over 200 businesses locally, but we also send that piece if they request so via our website, email, or phone call. Also at your seat, you'll see our citywide conventions and sports tournaments that are happening over the next couple of months. We take pride in having the most robust calendar of events in the community. And so if anyone is associated with any events that may be happening in the community, we ask that you share that information with us. Just 2 weeks ago, we celebrated National Travel and Tourism Week in Portage County and throughout the nation. And I'm proud to say for the 8th straight year, we saw an increase in tourism expenditures. Expenditures reached $135.4 million. It's up about 5.7% over the previous year. We've seen a steady growth in room tax collections. That's our biggest gauge of how we're doing in the community, in the village of Plover and the city of Stevens Point collectively. Year over year, we were about 9% above last year. So very commendable. Tourism product continues to grow in the community. I just want to give a couple, or nod to a couple of things that opened last year that you may not necessarily recognize as tourism development projects. First of all, the Claflin House. It's located at the corner of Division and Main, and that's a new short-term rental. So the county has been working on a short-term rental ordinance, and they've been working with my office for the last couple of years to make it legal for folks to rent their homes through Airbnb, Home and Away, and some others. So that's just one of the many short-term rentals that are now available throughout the region. Putt and Play added a laser tag course. For those of you that are familiar with the area, Bernard's Supper Club was transformed into Putt and Play, which is a indoor amusement park, and they just added laser tag in 2018. Also, the county may be familiar with the new lighted cross-country ski trail out at Standing Rocks Park. Again, another tourism development project, and it's our hope that we continue to bring travelers to our county parks for tourism and recreation. Also, the new band shell at Lake Pacwa Park, another tourism development project. And then looking ahead, there's several things that are in the hopper for 2019, including the Cultural Commons project, which is right along the riverfront area, new turf at Zenoff Park, the Green Circle trailhead at Schmeekley Reserve is also happening this year. The Banky Olson Outdoor Recreation Center at Standing Rocks Park, again, open air pavilion, a 2,500 square foot building with open air pavilion. The Pankowski Amphitheater at Schmeekley is also going to be built this year. And then a couple of events that we're hosting that are noteworthy, and they're also noted on your sheet. The 71st Annual U.S. Girls Junior Championship Golf Tournament. So we'll be welcoming about 156 players from across the country and across the globe. Last year there was participants from 13 different countries that were involved in that tournament. That'll be taking place July 22nd through the 27th. Century World is looking for volunteers for those that want to participate. Not only will the 156 players be in town, but their family, their coaches, spectators, and college recruiters from all Division I schools from across the country will be here as well. So it's our chance to roll out the red carpet to our visitors for that event. Additionally, the Village of Plover is hosting the Ride Across Wisconsin. It'll make its way through Plover August 17th. This is a 200-mile, 2-day bike ride that goes from La Crosse to Green Bay. Again, another what I call sexy event. A lot of what we see and do goes unseen because travelers coming into the region look much like you and I. And so I wanted to point out a couple of those things that will definitely make a difference. And you'll see bikes in the community in August, and you'll see an influx of people in their golf attire in July, in addition to all those events that are coming here already. So I think that's about it. That I just want to thank you again for your continued investment in our organization. Each year the county board approves a $15,000, or not always, but has traditionally approved a $15,000 allocation for tourism promotion and tourism development. I want you to know that those dollars are in good hands with our organization, and I take pride in the good work that we're doing. Every visit is very important to our community. It's really an introduction. It's the first date to our community. And so it's important for us to always roll out the red carpet and to make sure that we're appreciative of those visitors that are in the community, and that we're making sure that we're providing the best possible service that we can to those individuals that are coming in here. Because if they have a good experience, they'll share it socially with their friends and family. And, perhaps they will be the next workforce in this community, or they'll open a new business in this community. So it's very important that we welcome them here on their first date to our great community. So with that, I will close unless anyone has any specific questions for me.
Jim Gifford.
Where did you find a picture of one of probably 10 English setters in the whole county?
Actually, that was down at the farmer's market, and we very much take pride in local photography. We work with several local photographies for our guide. Again, trying to make sure that our story is genuine and unique and something that visitors can't find everywhere. We have really, over the years, changed our marketing efforts to not be all things to all people and be very specific in our marketing and very hyper-local.
Supervisor Barry Jakowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would just like to mention to the body that several of us seated here this evening worked very closely with Sarah to bring Farm Progress Days here to Portage County. She was our fearless leader for a situation that lasted over 4 years, and she was our fearless leader. She did a very fine job when it came to that, and I think the numbers that she's showing here tonight show that Sarah and her organization are doing a very fine job, and I would like to offer her a round of applause.
Oh, thank you, Barry. The pain has almost wore off from that event, so let's do it again, right?
Anybody else have any questions for Sarah?
All right, well, thank you. Again, I have an open door policy. I encourage anyone to stop over, shadow me for a day, a half day, or talk tourism at any point. Thank you.
Thank you. Next presentation, Scott Rifleman, Medical Examiner, Annual Report 2018. It's going to be a hard act to follow.
He's heard it all.
And you've all received my report, and I will just open it up to questions. I really have nothing to add to it other than what's written, unless you have some questions for me.
Any questions for Mr. Rifleman? Supervisor Neville.
I didn't see anything, and I mean, this is the first time I've seen one of these. Thank you. This is the first time I've seen one of these reports. But I had a question. I was curious, when you're investigating, do you come across situations where something happened, this is under the accidental category, and if somebody had received help sooner, they might have lived? I know there were a number of falls, and
That's a tough question. You know, that's probably, I guess I can't think of any specifics right now, but yeah.
Is that something you're looking for, too?
Well, certainly.
Yeah.
Yeah, certainly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Supervisor Hummel.
And under general statistics, the deaths reported to the coroner's office for review and investigation, there's a difference of 28 between the total deaths and the number reported. When are deaths not referred to you for review? Or where does that 28, where do those 28 people go?
Those would have been involved in an institution, which would be St. Michael's Hospital or a certified nursing home. Certified nursing home is one that has RN attendance and full-time nursing, 24-hour nursing attendance. Those do not have to be reported. Anybody outside of those institutions have to be reported to the medical examiner's office for investigation. I think the interesting statistic off of that is that number has gotten smaller and smaller and smaller over the years, and my investigation numbers have gotten larger and larger and larger. Primary reason for that is twofold. One is due to hospice. Hospice deaths, now people are staying in the hospitals much fewer hours or a very short period of time and go out into hospice, which is an awesome organization and an awesome program for people. And those have to be reported back to this office. So those numbers are included. So all hospice deaths are included. So the numbers of deaths in the hospitals have gone down, but the number of deaths in hospice has gone up. Also, cremation permits increases the numbers too. We used to, I think our cremation rate in Portage County now is about 60 or 65% of all dispositions are cremations. So that accounts for a high number because all those have to come back to our office for review and signature.
I see. Can I follow that up?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Mr. Rifleman, under the cause of death by classification, I noticed that there are 3 people listed with a cause of death as Down syndrome. and 2 people with cerebral palsy. It's always been my understanding that those are diagnoses of disability, but that they're not a cause of death. Why are they listed that way?
Well, they certainly can be a cause of death. Generally, what happens in those cases, it's a central nervous system demise.
A what?
Central nervous system demise. Okay. So it certainly can be used as a cause of death, and physicians use it as well as this office.
But the cause of death is not the disability itself. The cause of death is a complication from the disability?
It would be, but that syndrome can be used as a cause also. And probably all of those are signed by physicians and not by me or this office.
I see.
Probably signed off by a physician.
Thank you.
Supervisor Laddick.
Could you comment on deaths due to drug overdoses for us?
Yes, drug overdoses are a beast. I'm now starting to categorize them more. We are seeing, if you notice in the categories I have listed there, we have mixed drug toxicities, meaning that those are multiple drugs that have been used in the individual. I've now broken it down to heroin, and now I'm breaking it down into methamphetamine. We're seeing an increase in methamphetamine coming back into our community, and so 2019 stats will show meth-related deaths. It's a beast out there, and it's a national problem, national concern, and Portage County is not eliminated from it, so we have our fair share. And I would also like to point out that what you see in the death statistics, those that die from drug overdoses, is a small fraction of those that are actually turned around or managed by our EMS community, our mental health community, and so forth. It's a very small percentage to what we see out in the field with EMS and law enforcement and mental health.
Supervisor Splinter.
I found your report very interesting. I've also been a past safety instructor out at Isaac Walton's for our Hunter Ed program. One question I had is said cause of death by classification firearms. I saw 1 compared to Chicago area, and this is probably almost perfect. 1 is too many, but I saw there was under suicide it said firearms 4. Is there a differentiation? Are you discerning them differently on those 2 categories?
Well,
I think
getting your question correctly, it would be the firearms would be, there were 4 that were used firearms, and then the other,
I think I know what happened. At the bottom of the prior page is the word homicide, which was the heading for firearms, which was 1.
Yeah, you're correct. That carried over from page 2 to page 3 is homicide, and we had 1 homicide that was a firearm. So the category above that was actually natural deaths, and the suicide deaths, there were 10, of which of those 10, 4 were firearms.
Okay.
And then the others are broken down.
So the one above was related to the homicide?
It was, yeah. That's the way the sheets were printed off, I guess. So thank you for that.
Just that it's nice to know there weren't any deaths due to accidental discharges, as in, hunters or whatever else.
Sure.
From my perspective, I thought it was great.
Yeah, absolutely.
Supervisor Neville.
I had a question about suicide and traffic-related deaths. Is there a requirement you have for suicide that would prevent a traffic death from, there's not a heading in there for vehicles under suicide, but I would think that some people commit suicide by crashing into something.
See, what were your questions based? Certainly, people can use motor vehicles to commit suicide. Absolutely. Those have occurred in the past. We had none last year, but to be honest, those are very, very difficult to prove. Very difficult to prove. And kind of the philosophy, at least in my office, is if we cannot prove suicide, we will not label it as such. Certainly, motor vehicle fatalities can be suicidal, but they are difficult to prove sometimes.
So in the suicide category, there's some requirement like note or somebody telling somebody, or
Well, it would have to be intent of the person to actually,
it has to be some proof of the intent?
certainly,
Certainly. Okay.
Yep, absolutely.
Anybody else? I have one question too. We're at $75 for a cremation certificate.
Correct.
And I don't think a lot of you realize that that's what we are allowed to charge. That was frozen by the state a number of years back. And the amount of time has increased. When there's 292 cremations, spends a lot of time doing it, but we're only able to charge $75 in places like Milwaukee are charging like $310, $350, and that's part of the reason that there was such a variance that they froze it. But the people that were being frugal or not trying to gouge anybody, I guess is a way of putting it, are being penalized now because we can't change that. We can, but it's like 1.5%. It's like $2.50. We can raise it each year or less. So it's
Cost of living,
yeah, it's very small. So I just thought that was an interesting fact I had heard at one of the other meetings. So if nothing else, thank you. You didn't get a round of applause on your first one, but good job.
That's all right.
Oh, Supervisor Barry Jakowski.
So what you're saying, Mr. Chair, it should cost more to die?
No. We just are not recouping our costs. His salary and his fees and stuff he might have an hour, 2 hours in a cremation certificate and doesn't cover our costs. So, and we're not able to recoup them. So, thank you. Chris Holman, County Exec, County Update, Building Project.
Okay, thank you. Always enjoy having the opportunity to speak to you all tonight. There's a lot going on in the county, obviously. It's a busy time of year, but I'll have a somewhat of abbreviated list of things to walk through. There's not a lot to say about the building project at this point, but I suppose the main piece that I did over the last month was going around the county to outline areas to hold sessions out there to say, if people want to come to these sessions to learn more about it, to get their input, to fold into the overall document that I'll provide to the committees next month as these conversations continue. The town of Pine Grove came in with 8 people, so they won the award for most people in attendance. We'll say it's twice as many people as we had at both of the annex workshops for the downtown locations. So though people don't always attend these meetings, there is some interest out there. And I also, just to be clear, make a point to reach out to clerks and treasurers in the outline areas to say, if you run across anybody in your jurisdictions who have comments or ideas or thoughts about any of these things or any other topic, to feel free to reach out to me. And certainly that is the same for you and anyone else who might be listening to this on the radio later or watching it on TV at some point in the near future. Last night was the Towns Association meeting for our Portage County unit. There's a myriad of issues we discussed, but I'd say the biggest issue was kind of hammered on over and over, as our state representatives were also in attendance, was roads. You know, we hear a lot about highways and highway department and road conditions, and certainly counties have a lot of difficulties with that right now, but the towns are in an even worse position than we are. And I may have mentioned it before, but you know, if a given town in Wisconsin repairs a mile in front of somebody's house today, the current replacement schedule is approximately 371 years. So not something that's easy for them to grapple with in terms of how do you maintain your current level of infrastructure. The state representatives did mention the budget process, which is ongoing, and down in Madison, everybody kind of hinted at this idea that maybe June 30th would be when they all came to an agreement, but I think underlying that was also a large degree of uncertainty. So we at the county anyway certainly hope that that takes place, because if they can get the budget set at the state, that will really help our budget process. Not knowing what that may, if they will get there or not, we may have to, you know, we'll have to roll with the punches, so to speak, in our own budget process. But what we can control, we'll control, and get that done. You've probably heard of the Donaldson Company layoffs. It's one of a round of layoffs that's happened recently. And the reason I bring it up here is because in addition to, in this position, I serve on a North Central Wisconsin Workforce Development Board, and that's the primary agency that comes in to assist people who find themselves in these situations. And oftentimes it's difficult for the employers to try to figure out things on their end, but the employees are also in an increasingly difficult situation to navigate. And the way the rules change at the state, it's easy for someone to make a really good intention decision for themselves if they find themselves laid off, which may actually end up disqualifying them for benefits that they may need to carry them in that interim period between when they had the job and whatever their next job might be. So if you know of people or anybody approaches you that may need that kind of assistance, certainly feel free to put them in touch with me. I can connect them with all the people at these agencies that can connect them with the resources that they need to navigate. You know, it's a pretty difficult time for anybody in that situation. Just real briefly, you are probably aware that there was a lot of well testing projects going on out in the village of Nelsonville. That data has been compiled and the reports have been completed, and you'll see those coming to the next Groundwater Citizen Advisory Council, where that will be kind of the first step of the discussion. I'll just say that going through the data, I would say that it really highlights the complexity of the issue, and I think that it will kind of nudge the conversation in a positive direction, because I think oftentimes people may approach some of these things with biases that may, you know, not necessarily hope for certain outcomes, but expect certain outcomes. And when that doesn't play out in the data, it complicates things in a positive way. And I think that the data we're receiving back from this round of testing has done that. And so in the grand scheme, it's good for the conversation. It's not a short-term sort of situation that we're dealing with there or anywhere else in the county or the state, but it's a good example of the kind of data compilation that can help get people wherever they are in the state where they need to be, so that the steps they need to take and conversations they need to have about water quality in general can be pointed in the right direction. Just so you know, there was sort of unexpected damages, I would say, with the snowmelt flooding event along County Highway R, and the H2O project that fell through years ago was kind of the foundation for how the county and the municipalities that were involved with County Highway R developed their strategy for, like, how are we going to deal with this road? And so it hinged upon that project at the time. That was kind of the foundation for that discussion. Having that fall through obviously put everybody in a position of, well, what we had discussed in the past, that didn't take place, so now it's time to come back to the table and figure out what are the next steps so that we can resolve the situations along that piece of highway. So the county met with the town of Plover and village of Plover. It was a very positive meeting. A lot of productive ideas came out of that, and so it's good to have an updated strategy, per se, to resolve that issue for the residents along the road who, were among many who had a lot of water damage in that event, but it will also just kind of be a good piece of that long-term plan for that corridor, because there's a lot of potential going there with, now you have more housing developments going on south of B down towards Pleasant Drive. You still have the Crossroad Commons area. There's a lot happening in the business park. So these are all kind of framing the way we're trying to approach that road. Sticking to roads real quickly, I attended the North Central Highway Commissioners meeting. Funding was a big issue, not surprising. There was an interesting nugget that I thought I would share with you, and that it always pays to really dive down into these things and look at the details, because some counties or municipalities have been, say you had a wheel tax like we have had, and you say, well, we raised $2 million, hypothetically. Some people have been kind of reappropriating some of that money to elsewhere, because everybody has big needs. And so what they didn't expect is that the state funding formula actually accounts for how much you invest in your highway system. So even though they had the wheel tax, which gave them more money, they moved money out of into another area of the budget, which actually ended up lowering the amount of money they got in state support. So it was very counterintuitive how that process worked, but it was mainly based on the fact that people didn't pay attention to that formula. So for us, it's just a note to say that, our funding from the state hinges on our investment in our system. And so moving forward, it makes sense to keep that in mind as we talk about it, so that, even with the wheel tax in place, which obviously doesn't address all of our needs, we don't want to get too creative with that, given the way that all of our state support comes to us via that formula. A few factoids. Not surprisingly, the winter severity index was 20% above the 5-year average. Everybody felt it, and it was real, and that was a huge impact to salt budgets, labor budgets, across the board, whether it's the county, villages, towns, it didn't matter. Salt is becoming an increasingly difficult commodity to get your hands on. So a lot of people ran out of salt this past year. So it's really important to manage that. So we have to kind of balance that as well when we're hearing, the roads are this way or that way. Our highway department has to figure out we only have this much salt for the year, and we don't know what April or May or whatever it looks like. So sometimes I think people get a little frustrated with some treatments of some roads in some storms, but in the grand scheme, it's reflecting the larger strategy, which is hold on to the salt so that you have it when you need it and don't run out like some counties did. 2019 is going to be another year like that. The prices for salt are almost double what they were in not too long ago, so that's another budget hit for a lot of people. In Wisconsin this year, we spent $48 million on salt. We used about 600,000 tons of it across the state. Where else we got here? There's a tie-in to chloride in the water, so we've heard that in different discussions related to water, but the thing to keep in mind is that when you're talking about surface waters, rivers and streams and lakes, it takes about 2 to 5 years for chloride issues, call them, to work through the system. But if it gets into the groundwater, then it takes closer to 30 to 40 years for that chloride situation to resolve itself. So that's certainly something to keep in mind, and it's also something that's driving, I think, the transition towards using brines instead of granular salt. You can use less salt. It's more effective in almost every situation, and so you're starting to see a lot of counties and municipalities shift to that approach. Portage County's record, whether it was with salt, was very conservative compared to other counties. And so even though we don't have a fully adopted sort of brine use in the county, our use of salt, I think, has been very measured and appropriate, and compared to other counties, which similar size, similar road miles, way more salt used. So they're doing a very good job managing that particular resource for them. Lastly, I attended the Ag and Extension Region 7 meeting. A lot of things have been going on at Cooperative Extension. It's no longer going to be Cooperative Extension. July 1 is kind of the kickoff for this new division of extension under the UW system. It'll be different colors, different name badges, different branding all across the board. So if you start seeing changes in that, don't be too surprised. The thing to keep in mind, too, as you address anything that you're working with, the extension really does have a huge array of areas that it works on, and now they also have the entire UW system behind them. So even if you were some county, maybe you had one extension agent or educator, that person is still a tie-in to the overall system. So if you had a question about something that maybe that person wasn't an expert in, they can identify the people in the system who are and bring them to you so that you get the information and resource and assistance that you need for whatever the topic might be. An interesting point of discussion. There were 7 county leaders there. Supervisor Gussel was there along with myself from Portage County. We heard a presentation from the assistant dean who oversees our region, and one of the individuals in attendance pointed out that the Smith-Lever Act drives a lot of the funding, and a piece of that funding is the number of farms in the state or in your area. And the reason I bring that up, and it's probably not news to some of you, but just in the United States, we lost 3,000 dairy farms last year. And in Wisconsin last year, we lost 700 dairy farms, not farms in general, just dairy farms. Last month, we lost 90. So last month, you lost 3 farms per day, and it's not getting any better. So, if USDA ever changes the way they account for farms, or tally them across the state, or as this trend continues to get worse, that may, have implications for extensions budget as well. I don't think it's happening right now per se, but it's something to also just keep in mind. Another one of those details of the formulas and how money comes to assist a certain program. But, the farm economy is in the tank. It's probably, I would say, in its 7th year of a slump. The tariffs that we've been experiencing have exacerbated everything, and it's in every sector now. And so it's not just dairy, it's beef, it's corn, it's soybeans. It doesn't matter what you do right now. Farmers are not able to make the money they need just to meet the cost of production. So there's no real sign of good news in 2019 based on the way USDA is looking at it. I don't know of anybody who's talking about any sign of hope in the near term. And this year is, between the flooding and the wet weather and cold weather and growing degree days, we're already way behind. Nationwide, we're already setting records for how far behind the planting schedule is. Doesn't matter what state you're in. So we have a strong agricultural presence in this county, and that's why I'm kind of hammering on it now. And it's something to, when you're talking to farmers or if you're talking about farming issues, try to keep these things in mind, because farmers and people in farming support jobs are under a tremendous amount of stress. And whether you have suicide hotlines or assistant hotlines, anything that people are trying to find resources with, they are overwhelmed everywhere you go in the states for these things. So it's something that, even just acknowledging it to farmers if you run across them would be nice from time to time. So something to keep in mind, and I'll leave it at that. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer those.
Supervisor Bob Gifford.
Yeah, I'm really glad this future analytics report just came out, because as you know, you were in all the Portage County Prosperity for 2040 meetings. But what this shows us is the problems that we face with attracting the young workforce are a statewide issue, and that's where the resources have got to be developed, right? I mean, we did a lot of these real futuristic, visionary, kind of short, small group meetings, but I came home with the realization that we're talking about stuff that we don't have the resources to do, right? So what needs to be, if you want to attract the young workforce, you have to have affordable housing, because the wages of starting workers are never enough to cover all your expenses. And you have to have a mode of transportation that's better than having to go out and buy your own automobile. And these are things we can't address at the county level and can't be paid for on property taxes. They have to come from the state level, and they're going to have to find new creative ways of funding and taxation in order to pay for them. And I would suggest the wealth tax, but that's another story. So it's good I think the counties need to get on the case of the state of Wisconsin and really on the legislature and start really hammering that we need resources. If we don't do this, as this report says, we're just going to age out, right? So that's my comment.
I can speak to that just briefly, and I'd say that, any given year, the Counties Association is looking at a variety of issues, but I'd say this year in particular, there are a lot of very serious issues, some of which you've alluded to, that are affecting everyone in the state. And so, you hear it at meetings, or like, if it's a highway meeting, they're like, a bridge doesn't care if you're Republican or Democrat, the bridge is just going to fail. The groundwater doesn't care if you're Republican or Democrat, the housing price doesn't care if you're Republican or Democrat. Like, at their core, the issues that we're grappling with are very nonpartisan, in the sense that it just affects the lived experience of whoever you are, wherever you might find yourself. So, that chorus of voices is getting louder and louder, and you're certainly right that there's really not many issues, I'd say, that have a short-term answer. So not only do we have to find sort of creative and innovative ways to just deal with the situation we're dealt, but also we should expect and continue to identify the areas for the state to say we need longer term much more sustainable and not so much kind of whimsical political swings in how we address these things, because it really just puts everybody, again, at that lived experience level through the grinder, and the further it goes, the worse it gets.
And if you add all of us up, all the local elected officials, nonpartisan, I might add, we probably outnumber the legislators by 50 to 1. So let's use our power of numbers to start really making some changes. That's what I would say.
I guess I want to add to that. Melissa and I are both on the Ambassadors Committee for Wisconsin Counties Association. And I think every time we've gone down there, we've been holding out our hand asking for money. Chris has been there as well. And it wouldn't be right if I didn't mention Ray Shabilsky, because he's been there as well, too, donating his time to try and do what we can to strong-arm the folks down there and get some more money out of them. But it's a long, hard road to plow, so... But we're there every time saying, we need more, so.
The only thing I'll add is that it's not just the Counties Association. You're seeing more and more the League of Wisconsin Municipalities, the Towns Association. We're all going down and we're saying the same things, and I think that's getting more attention than usual too, which is good.
I forgot Cindy. Cindy was there as well. Supervisor Mua.
Well, I don't need a mic because I can talk loud. Yeah, I just wanted to add to that, and I know it's just from this report, but since we're in the discussion, I think, also seeing the decrease in migrant workers. I'm a driver's license for all person, and so I think there's other things that we can definitely ask the state for besides money, is really to pass legislation that would make our roads safer and would decrease like auto insurance for most folks. So driver's license for all really would bring us back more migrant workers into the areas.
And just, I can touch on it briefly too. I think 90% of the migrant labor on dairy farms is Mexican. There's a lot of seasonal labor here in this county, harvesting a lot of the commodity production that we see. And so there's another direct tie-in to the county's economy, very, kind of pillars of the local economy too. And I think you're right to call out that migrant labor has a very strong role in all of that. And I'd also say that everywhere where you've seen states and others make decisions that kind of ignore that piece. I mean, you've seen things where crops are rotting in the fields, you can't get labor, it leads to bad situations for everybody in the big picture. And I think that addressing more of the angles like that makes a lot of sense in terms of getting out of your silo and seeing how everything is kind of the systems approach to looking at that sort of stuff.
You had mentioned the safety on the highway, and I just I've tried to figure out a place to put this in, but Chris and I and Supervisor Zdroik, as chair of highway, had gotten an email that there was an accident with one of the plow trucks. Was it today, Nathan, or yesterday? Today on I-39. It's a clear sunny day, and they were plowing the shoulder, or he was parked grading on the edge of the shoulder past the white fog line just before the Little Plover River. And you can see that truck from a long ways away. And a semi had come by, was close enough that he hit the mirror on the plow truck and kept going. They were able to get an officer to pull him over and stop him, but he said he had known he had did it, but stop. So when I want to make sure everybody knows that, because when we talk about how dangerous it is out there, things like this happen and nobody ever hears about it. And I'm a big believer in making sure that information carries out and the rest of you folks hear that, not only when we have someone give a report, but as it's going on all the time. And when we talked about, we had Nate come and talk about the use of resources as far as the hourly rate, the fuel, the salt consumption, and then when we had Ray come and talk, it's important that you and the public and everybody else gets to hear these things. Supervisor Mua, you had another
sorry, just to add to that. So I don't even know if I'm allowed to say this here or, but I guess I'm going to say it here. But it'd be good for the county to look. I don't know which committee it will come through, but or maybe a resolution in support of driver's license for all. I know different counties such as Milwaukee County and other counties have already done so. So. to really show support down at the state.
Okay. Anybody else have any other comments for Chris? Oh, Supervisor Barry Jakowski.
Thank you. I would just like to thank Executive Holman for organizing the meetings in the outlying areas to discuss the different options for our building projects when it comes to law enforcement, courthouse situations. Seemed like a good idea at the time. Both Executive Holman, Chair Haga, myself, Mildred, tried to attend as many as we could, but the turnout was very poor. So my question, or my comment to the body would be, when you're out engaged in conversation about county business and opportunities in the county, please try to strike up a conversation with all of our constituents, the other people here that live here in Portage County, to get some sort of a feel as to what we should do and how we should vote when it comes to the situation. It was very disappointing to me that the turnout was as low as it was, and I realize everybody gets busy with children and sports and grandchildren, but it just is very disappointing to see that people seem to have little or no interest. So.
Yeah, no, it was disappointing. I will say that in all the meetings, I made it clear to the people, to the municipal leaders who hosted us, that we'll do another round of those talks, as conversations develop, so that we continue to reach out to the outlying areas and get their input, so that you're getting that whole countywide, input, or as much as people can bring to bear in those situations. And I think as we move forward, wherever we end up moving on any of these things, we can do a better job of trying to get even more lead time, more press releases, more Facebook time, things like that, so that people have more opportunities to see that they're going on.
Barry?
If I may, one thing, Executive Holman, I was told by the people in both Rosholt and in Amherst, maybe we should use their little newspaper. I guess a lot of people get that, and they said we kind of missed an opportunity. I wanted to say that before I forgot it. So.
He's taking notes. I see he's writing it down. Anybody have anything else with that? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Resolution and ordinances. Number 1, Town of Plover Comprehensive Plan, amending the Portage County zoning ordinance map, consolidated water power company property.
Resolution 122, 2018-2020, submitted by Planning and Zoning Committee, changing the land use designation and zoning classification for the Town of Plover consolidated property.
Motion by Supervisor Barry Jakowski, seconded by Supervisor O'Brien. Discussion. Supervisor Drake.
With granting this change in zoning, does that set up any liability for Portage County? Because every time we grant a variance or a modification on our shorelines, it seems like it sets up Portage County for being the demon. Well, you granted it, now how are you going to protect it, or what are the options for the homeowners as such? Is that going to strike a major concern down the road?
Well, Barry, I don't know if you can answer that. We don't have anybody else from here planning.
It's an open question in relating to our shorelines. It seems we grant 100 years of residency, but then when they're flooded, they always run to Portage County for, why did you grant it in the first place type attitude. And Portage County is not in that light to enforce half of the time, because it just is. It's recommended by the townships, goes to our planning and zoning, it's adopted, and moves on in the system. It's a broad buckshot question.
I don't have anybody here from planning and zoning tonight, and I don't know if Barry cares to comment to that or has anything to add to that or not. That's fine too, but.
Certainly, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the opportunity. I probably can't answer it as well as someone from staff that works with it every day that could. This situation is a situation where all these homes have been there for, I'm going to say, probably 50 years. Consolidated Water and Power had leased those properties to those homeowners. What the situation is Consolidated Water and Power has decided to sell those properties to those homeowners. So this, in order for the properties to be sold, it had to be rezoned. So it's not new construction. It's not something that is going, it's a situation where the homes have been there, again, I'm going to guess for 50 years. So I don't see where it's going to add any more liability to Portage County in any way, shape, or form. I'm assuming it's in a floodplain and has to be insured as such, probably. I'm not answering it as well probably as staff could have, but.
Supervisor Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Supervisor Jakowski, for that explanation that helps considerably, because I had similar concerns as Supervisor Strike, because, you know, as we think about comprehensive planning, it's really about the long-range strategy on how we're going to use our resources. The map helped, and your explanation helped, that it really is just confirming what already exists. So thank you for that.
You're welcome. Thank you. I wish maybe I could be more specific, but that's the gist of it.
Supervisor Drake, you had a comment to Barry's?
I guess my only concern is why it may be there for 50, 75 years or whatever, and then they come in and maybe modify the residence, and then they have a flooded incident that occurs, and they always will attack Portage County because, well, you granted the exception, you knew what was out there, and then we're in the position of defending of our decision from planning and zoning. And I just am a little apprehensive of, maybe 40 years and maybe 10 years, but that's immaterial. If it's going to happen, this is a prime year that something could happen. It's an open-ended
I think
question.
whether the zoning, whatever the zoning is, the homes are already there. If we had the flooding and the zoning was one or the other, they would still come back to us. But Mr. Gussel's being very patient. Supervisor Gussel, you had a comment?
Yes. Some of those have been there more than 60, 70 years, I believe. I had opportunity to speak with one of those landowners, and they've been trying to buy that land for numerous years so that they can call it their own, you might say. And they're looking forward to this opportunity, and I guess you have to rezone it so this can happen. Next thing is, these are not below the dam, they're above the dam, I believe most of them. So the water is at the constant level there, rather than if it were below the dam. And that would reduce your chances of being flooded out.
Thank you. Supervisor Barry Jakowski.
I guess I would ask Corp Counsel, Mr. David Ray, have we ever been held liable for a situation to your knowledge?
Not that I'm aware. And I'd concur with Supervisor Barry Jakowski's observations here. I was not part of this process, so I didn't attend the planning and zoning meetings and didn't work with planning and zoning staff on this one. But reading the reports that are part of the packet here, I agree, it makes sense to me, or what seems to be happening here is that those properties were there, and of the use that has existed as residences for a long, long time. What's being done now is there's rezoning occurring to make it consistent with the use that's been occurring for that long period of time. If, to address concerns about changing or adding on to the property and those sorts of things, that because it's waterfront, then you've got to deal with the DNR and or the Board of Adjustment. And those matters are going to come before those bodies if changes are made going forward.
Dave covered my point. You're good? Okay. All right.
Any question?
Motion? We got a motion and that's right, it was Dale and Barry. We got a motion and a second. Any other discussion? All those in favor vote yes, and opposed no.
23 ayes, 2 excused, resolution adopted.
Number 2, Town of Plover Comprehensive Plan Amendment and Portage County Zoning Ordinance Map Amendment, Fleece Property.
Resolution 123, 2018-2020, submitted by Planning and Zoning Committee, changing the land use designation and zoning classification for Town of Plover Fleece property.
Motion by Supervisor Barry Jakowski, seconded by Supervisor Larry Rakowski. Discussion. All those in favor, vote yes. And
We have a question.
Whoops, I'm sorry. Mildred Neville?
I had a question about this. 2 properties came through together in this resolution. I mean, in the way the town of Plover dealt with it, there were 2 properties looked at the same time. And is there some way that we as a county board can ask the town to bring these through one at a time? I mean, to separate them when they vote on them? I think there was a comment in here by staff that they would prefer it was done that way.
This is one property, and the other one was a standalone as well. I don't know what you're asking, Mildred.
Well, I didn't mark it, but I thought it was in here where the,
This is pertaining to just the Roger Fleece property.
right, but when they were voted on in the town of Plover, they were together.
Oh,
The 2 properties were together. So that, I think it was Mr. Garby who couldn't vote on anything having to do with it or something like that because the 2 were together and he's on the Board of Adjustment. Anyway, it just seemed to me it would simplify things if
I don't,
if they would
Supervisor Barry.
separate them.
Yeah, I agree, but I don't know if we have any control over the outlying areas. Supervisor Barry Jakowski.
I believe the only reason Mr. Garby didn't vote is because he is on BOA, and both of these instances, excuse me, had to go in front of BOA, and I believe, if I remember reading it correctly, that was the situation, and Mr. Garby just thought it wasn't fair for him to vote on it twice. I don't understand Mildred's concerns, and maybe she certainly has a valid one, but I guess maybe I don't understand it.
I think what she was asking was when the township or whatever voted on it, they voted on both of these issues at the same time instead of separating them like we have them separated here. It shows that they were approved as one. Is that what you're saying, Mildred?
Well,
the township approved both of these, and we just separated them. They should have separated them as well.
Well, and so even though we have no control over them,
Yeah.
could you ask them if they might separate things in the future? Anyway, that's my comment.
Supervisor Astro, you had a comment?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I believe what Mildred's speaking to is on page 2 of the minutes for the town of Plover. And it's it's highlighted by a star by the number 4 on page 2. Or it's actually listed as page 3. And if you read the second paragraph, it kind of explains, I think, what she was saying for your information.
Okay. Any other discussion? We have a motion and a second. All those in favor vote yes, and opposed no.
Two ayes, 1 abstained, 2 excused, resolution adopted.
Number 3, approving the addition of a Jordan Park Dam capital improvement project and a 2019 budget adjustment.
Resolution 124, 2018-2020, submitted by Park Commission and Capital Improvements Economic Development Committee. This is a budget adjustment resolution for the Jordan Dam project and requires a 2/3 vote of the board.
Motion by Supervisor Bob Gifford, seconded by Supervisor James Gifford. Discussion. Supervisor Barry Jakowski.
I think Finance Director Josie explained this at the last meeting, that this needs to be done now because of the project. There's funding for the project that needs to be applied for, so that if anybody starts looking at when the work is going to be done, it's a little ahead of
And it was to approve the big part was to approve the study, the engineering part of it, and we didn't have it in there. Is that right, Mr. Rose?
So yes, we needed to have the engineering done. Supervisor Jakowski mentioned that we need to get this under the grant process, which is a 2-year grant process, so it comes every 2 years. It's up this year, so we need the engineering done in order to proceed with the grant process. That's in November, so we wanted to get this going early.
Any engineering and stuff can be wrapped into the project as far as our reimbursement.
Correct.
So, any other discussion? All those in favor vote yes and oppose no.
Twenty-three ayes, 2 excused, resolution adopted.
Number 4, authorizing a change in the scope of the work for BWBR Dewberry to include the concept development of 20-25 acres of green space in the East Park Commerce Center.
Resolution 125, 2018, 2020, submitted by Space and Properties, Finance, and Capital Improvements Economic Development Committees, approving the concept development of green space in the East Park Commerce.
Motion by Supervisor Pataki, seconded by Supervisor Barry Jakowski. Supervisor Jim Gifford.
In the second whereas, I made a rather long and complicated amendment to make people happy.
Use the mic.
When it got put
Mike,
here,
Jim.
a word was omitted. Whereas the city of Stevens...
Jim, can you use the mic?
Whereas the city of Stevens Point has approached the county with an that, between the and that, we should insert the word offer. I move that as an amendment.
I've got a motion on the amendment. I need a second. Seconded by Supervisor Larry Rakowski. Any other discussion on the amendment? All those in favor of the amendment with aye? Aye. Opposed? Amendment carried. Back to the original. Any discussion on the original amendment?
Original motion.
If not, all those in favor vote yes and opposed no.
Twenty-three ayes, 2 excused, amended resolution adopted.
Number 5, authorizing and ratifying a contract for the Portage County Highway Department addition and renovation project.
Resolution 126, 2018, 2020, submitted by Finance, Space and Properties, and Capital Improvements Economic Development Committee, approving the contract for the highway addition and renovation.
Motion by Supervisor Laddick, seconded by Supervisor Matt Jakowski. Discussion. Supervisor Matt Jakowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd just like to take the opportunity to thank the Finance, Space and Properties, and KIP BDC committees for having some forward thinking and looking into the future. I realize the original proposal from the Highway Commissioner was not to add the extra 40 feet as referenced as alternate 1 with a price of $300,000. $300,000 may sound like a lot of money for 40 feet, but when you figure out the square footage cost of that 40 feet addition across the whole width of the building, it comes down to $41.67 per square foot. We are never going to be able to get space built for that price in the future. Heck, it's hard to build a pole shed for under $50 worth of square feet, or for under $50 a square foot if you put 6 feet or 6 inches of concrete in it. So again, thank you for doing that, and thank you for looking towards the future.
Supervisor Jeannie Dodge.
Matt mentioned the alternate 1 was added to this. And at Finance Committee yesterday, we adopted the resolution, but we added an amendment that I'd like to offer today to the fiscal note, and at the end of the fiscal note to add, the addition of alternate 1 will be funded with unused contingency from the project, if available, or funded with existing county funds from either capital or highway, depending on final costs.
Seconded by Supervisor James Gifford. Any other discussion on the amendment? On the amendment only, all those in favor with yes? Aye. I'm sorry. Opposed, no. Amendment carries. I like to change it up, make sure you guys aren't sleeping on me. All right, now back to the original motion. Any other discussion? We had about, the three committees in the joint review, we had about an hour on this topic. And I think that the best thing was to let the finance department, the county exec, and the highway figure out the best way to fund this, and I think they came up with some really good alternatives. And again, everybody was in favor of making sure we do this right and looking forward to the future, and nobody wants to spend extra money, but I think this is a good use of funds that'll last us for a long time and fit our needs far into the future. So with that, I say thanks to that committee as well as for having the foresight. So, any other discussion? All those in favor vote yes, and opposed no.
Twenty-three ayes, 2 excused, resolution adopted. Amended resolution adopted.
I'll take a motion to adjourn. Motion by Stan Pataki, seconded by Barry Jakowski. All in favor, with aye? Aye. Opposed? We're adjourned. Thank you.
Videos of these meetings are available for viewing on the city's website, stevenspoint.com/videos.